Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel Meet Praneeth. Today I have the opportunity to have Emily on the channel. We already had one video before on EB1 and now she's back. And today we have a lot to discuss. So first of all, she's the founding immigration attorney at Sumner Immigration Law. And we wanted to discuss a lot of things that are unpacking slowly after Trump 2.0. And she's here to explain to us what are the implications, what are the things that we should be aware of, and how to traverse through this particular timeline or whatever is going on in the immigration field. So Emily, first of all, thank you so much for taking the call and explaining us all the things that we wanted to learn from you. So what do we want to start with first? What's on your mind? We'll start with that.
Sure. Thank you for having me. So first, I want everyone listening to know that we are here to support you. When I say we, I mean we. I mean me, Praneeth, my team, the immigration attorney community, the immigration law community. In general, we are here to support you. We want you here. We value diversity and inclusion and all of the amazing talent and fun and humor and amazing things that you bring culture, to the United States. We value that and we want you here. It may seem like on any given day, like, oh my goodness, everybody in the United States wants me to go home. And it's going to get discouraging. If it didn't feel discouraging today, it will feel discouraging. Absolutely. But that doesn't mean that we don't want you here. It doesn't mean that you don't have a future here. We've done this before, as you know, that we've done in the previous Trump administration. That doesn't mean that we have a crystal ball and can predict everything that's going to happen, but we've done it before and we'll do it again. And we value you and want you here. The second thing I wanted to tell everybody about is the hierarchy of laws. And this isn't going to be, a long half-hour long law school lecture, right, about the hierarchy of laws in the United States. But I do think it's important to touch on because everything that has come out so far from the Trump administration, and there have been 13 executive orders, if I counted correctly a few minutes ago, in the past 24 hours, right, or 36 or however long it's been since he was inaugurated. They've all been executive orders, and there have been other executive orders for sure by various presidents. Immigration-related executive orders like DACA, the Dreamer, it's not an act, but the Dreamer executive order that Obama had, Biden had a number of executive orders that are now being undone. But my point is it's not unique to Trump to come up with these executive orders. It's a relatively easy way to supposedly maybe make a change, but it's very fluid. In executive order. So the highest law of the land, and if anyone who's listening has ever studied for the naturalization exam, you'll know this because it's one of the questions. The supreme law of the land is the US Constitution, right? So it's very difficult to change the US Constitution. In order to do that, you have to you have to go through a process with Congress where they have to ratify the changes to that. It's very, very difficult to do. We have a number of amendments to the Constitution, including one that we'll be talking about.
Right.
But in general, it's really hard to make a change to the Constitution, and it's considered the supreme law of the land, meaning if there's a conflict with another law, the Constitution prevails. Then you have federal law. When I say federal law, I mean what we call as lawyers, we call the statute. So within the immigration context, the Immigration and Nationality Act is the statute. Okay, so the statute is something that has been made into law. Both houses of Congress have approved it. There's a process that happens there, but both houses of Congress have approved it, and the president has signed it into law, whoever the president was at the time. Right. Again, difficult to change the law. I don't know if you've ever heard the phrase, it takes an act of Congress. That means it's really difficult to do. That's where it came from. Then you have the regulations. The regulations are the rules, let's say, that the agencies develop. So when I say agencies, I mean like USCIS, Department of State, Department of Labor. They develop those to implement or to interpret and implement the statute. So they're supposed to stick to the statute, right, that Congress created. There's some gray areas there for sure. But those are the regulations, easier to change. You have to have, usually you have to have a notice period and comment period and all that, so you know what's going to happen. Then you have like policy memos, executive orders from like the president, and policy memos from USCIS that may be directed or influenced by the president's administration.
Got it.
So that's kind of a very oversimplified, but high level overview of the hierarchy of laws. And I want to point that out because the changes that we're talking about today, with the exception of one piece of legislation, are executive orders. So we have to take a breath. They seem really scary, and I'm right there with you. If you feel anxious or afraid, I am right there with you. You are valid in feeling that way.
Right.
But they're executive orders, and we have to see what's going to happen. There's already legislation.
Right.
So should we start with the first one?
Sure.
Okay.
And just to give a perspective, I think just to repeat that what you said, because a lot of people should know what you just said, because the Constitution holds the most power, because that's where all the definition is, right? And then you have the statutes, and then you have all the policies or the rules that come out, and for example, the executive orders also lie in the same stature, right? So it's I think to give them a perspective, like for example, USCIS published the final rule of H-1B. So that is something that is basically a policy, and that can be changed by USCIS or by the executive orders. But change in the Constitution is something that is very big and takes a lot of time to do. Makes sense. Okay. Yeah. That's
Absolutely.
my understanding as well. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about is the birthright citizenship. And I have some notes that I'm going to reference because all of this is new, even for us immigration lawyers. We knew it was coming, of course. But first of all, what is birthright citizenship? You know what that is, Praneet?
I think from what I read, it's that if you're born in United States, in the physical territory of United States, then you are automatically given the birthright, like you're the citizen of United States. And then that applies to anyone who is born in the country in that premises, right? So, and do correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what my understanding says.
Absolutely. Yep. So the idea of birthright citizenship, which applies in the United States and in other countries as well, but not every country,
Right.
is if you are physically born in the United States, you are a U.S. citizen when you were born.
Right.
This it derives from the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which we just talked about. So the Constitution says, and I'm reading it word for word here, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. So basically it says if you're born in the United States, you're a citizen of the United States. Pretty straightforward.
Right.
So the Trump administration has kind of hooked onto this term, subject to the jurisdiction thereof. Right. And they're making an argument in the executive order. So remember that the change that we have now is an executive order, not a change in the statute, not a change in the Constitution, not even a regulatory change. Right. But they are saying that individuals who are born in the United States to parents with a certain immigration status or lack thereof are not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States and therefore are not U.S. citizens. So they have made this declaration, right, in the executive order. So the two kind of categories are when the person's mother is unlawfully present in the United States and the father was not a U.S. citizen or permanent resident, or when the person's, this is important, I think, especially for your community, for your audience, when the person's mother's presence in the United States was lawful but temporary. And it gives as an example, such as but not limited to visiting under the visa waiver program, which is like ESTA that some countries have, right. Are able to use, visiting the work visa, so H-1B, L, TN, E3, or tourist visa. So basically, if you're here temporarily, and again, if the father is not a U.S. citizen or a green card holder, you're not considered a U.S. citizen. Okay. Importantly, one thing to keep in mind before everybody's like, oh my gosh, my child was born in the United States and I was on H-1B, what is going on? Like, are we revoking their passports, whatever? No. So first of all, we don't know. I'll talk in a minute about what might happen with this. But the first thing to note is the order says that this applies to persons who are born in the United States after 30 days from the date of the order. So that means children that are born starting 30 days from yesterday. Right. So it's not retroactive the way that it's written, and it does not affect individuals that have already been born in the United States. So if you're here on H-1B and your 15th year of H-1B, which you know pretty, I have clients in that situation, then when your child turns 21, they're a U.S. citizen, and when your child turns 21, they absolutely can sponsor you for permanent residence, unless that statute changes, which I don't think, but who knows. So it's not retroactive is the main point.
That's great. Right.
Yeah. And then going forward, so now the question is, okay, Emily, you say this isn't retroactive, but I'm due with my child, in March, April, whatever it is, what's going to happen? Are they going to get a US passport?
Right.
The question is to be determined, but already, so this came out yesterday, right? The ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, has already sued. 18 different states have sued. So what I think is going to happen is that a federal court, I don't know which one yet, but a federal court will put a stay on this. They will say, hey, we need to really look into this.
Right.
And while we're working out the legality, whether this is something that you can legally do or not, it's not being implemented. I think slash hope that will happen, but I really do think that will happen.
Right.
Ultimately, I think it's going to go up to the Supreme Court. And I think the Supreme Court is going to make that decision, like I said, of what it means to be subject to the jurisdiction thereof.
Right.
So I'm not saying, oh, don't worry about it. It's going to go, it's going to be litigated and it's impossible to change the Constitution. I'm not necessarily saying that this isn't going to come into effect, but
Right.
I really don't think it's going to be in effect for long,
Right.
if at all, in the, while it's being litigated.
Right. So there are two questions that come to my mind, and maybe that could be the question of the audience as well. Let's say, okay, well, I already have a kid who has a US citizenship, all good, nothing gonna change. We will continue as we were here. But let's say you said like if you're like due in April, and this gonna take in effect from 20th of February, right? So in that case, the state has jurisdiction prevails the executive order. Let's say you're in California, and California says, no, we don't want you, we don't care, we will stay with what's in Constitution. Does that
Yeah.
take prevalence, or still the EO would be the main thing?
That's a great question. And the answer is, as of right now,
Right.
the federal law would take precedence. So it's the US Department of State,
Right.
not a state like California, but
Right.
US Department of State that issues passports.
Right. That would be
And they would be the one to give a child a passport, which is really, other than a birth certificate, the one, the way that you show that you're a US citizen.
right.
So yeah, the federal, the executive order would prevail.
Yeah.
But that's an interesting question about the state that we'll get
Right.
into.
Makes sense. And
Yeah.
the other question is maybe kind of related to it, but let's say that I'm due on April, right? And this is not stopped. There's still being challenged in the courts, and the court is taking its time to do its own due course. So, like, if everything gets resolved and they say, oh, well, this is not going to work, right? So, anyone that was stopped from having a citizenship because of this would be given the citizenship, or they will just have to go through the visa route?
No. So the bottom line is no one really knows, right? Because in
Right.
our lifetime, this has never been an issue. It hasn't been an issue in 130 years. But I fully believe that if ultimately, let's say it goes to the Supreme Court and they say, no, birthright citizenship stands. If you were born in the United States, you're a US citizen, it would be retroactive, even to cover a person who was born in the United States while this was all in limbo. Again, no guarantees, but I really fully believe that's what would happen.
Right. I think that would help a lot of people have that clear thought, because everyone is just kind of thinking of what's going to happen, what's next, right? We don't, and you're right, everything is kind of in the TBD state, to be decided state, but at least this kind of clarity helps think a little bit more clearly and make your path and decide your path forward, right?
Yes, for
Uh,
sure.
because I personally know a lot of people, I've been through the same journey. Like with your kid, that's one hope that you have. Okay, let's say if I'm on H1B for 21 years, fine. But my kid might be able to sponsor me for all the hard work that I did. And I'm here in this country for like 2 decades, right? Uh,
Absolutely.
that's taken away. That's a big shock for all the talent that's working in the country. Not just because they want to have a kid in the United States, but all the hard work that they've paid off. It's at some point they want that stability in their life, right? Uh,
Absolutely.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah,
And
and I would encourage people to keep the hope, and not to give false hope. I think there is a lot that we need to take very seriously,
yes,
including this. But just because things are rocky right now, it will not last forever, and things will resolve, and there
yeah,
may well be a path forward. So I would say don't make rash decisions in the moment, thinking, "Oh my gosh,
right.
my
Yeah,
child's not a U.S.
definitely.
citizen."
Right. I would say that keep your tabs open, talk to attorneys, see what's
Yes.
in front of you, wait for the things to clear up. I think what's happening is like a lot of videos, a lot of posts, And it's so confusing, right? Because there's so much information and you don't know what is the right, what is the wrong information. So eventually you get confused and you might take a irrational decision just based on that, right? So I
Right.
think that's really helpful of you to kind of show the path more clearly to all of us. Uh,
Absolutely.
and I think that kind of takes us into the next one, which is a little more scarier when I was reading through it. So it says
Mhm.
the Laken Riley Act that's going to
Yes.
probably pass, and that basically there's the thing is that from my simple understanding that if some country is not taking back their undocumented migrants, they become a part of a certain list, and then you have this power to basically send or cancel all visas for people who are part of that country or are coming from that country. Again, you would have better understanding and if you can explain this and tell
Yeah.
what's going on or what might happen, so that would be really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is interesting in a not good way. And to be quite honest, it's not, I've seen reference to this act, in the past several months and especially weeks,
Right,
and I haven't paid a whole lot of attention to it because what I have seen
right,
is this reference about detaining individuals that commit theft, right? That's kind of been the focus. So basically, trying to detain, meaning put into jail and ultimately into removal proceedings, individuals that commit certain crimes, and that definition has been broadened. So that is, I've seen it and I'm like, oh, that's not good, but I haven't really paid attention.
right,
And there's another aspect, like you say, that is really quite concerning.
right,
That is that it grants a couple things. It grants the state attorney generals, the right to sue the Secretary of Homeland Security. So, right to sue the federal government, in other words, to enforce the act's provision. Okay, that is huge because there's always been, I mean, there's been exceptions with Arizona and other states. Over the years, there have been certain states that try to, make their own immigration laws and enforcement and everything. But generally speaking, immigration law is a federal matter, and it always has been. And this is huge. It's very concerning. But the
right,
bigger thing, I think, is what you were just saying, that it prohibits the Secretary of State, meaning the federal
right,
Secretary of State, right? Like, think Madeleine Albright back
right,
in the
yeah,
90s,
yeah,
from granting visas to citizens of countries, like you said, that refuse to accept the return of their nationals who have been deported from the United States.
right,
So they're called recalcitrant countries. And, I've heard that word before, but honestly, I did not know that this was even in immigration law. You learn something new every day, even after 19 years, right? But it's a thing, and so they're not. In other words, the Trump administration is not just pulling this out of thin air. It's in the statute that it's allowed for the Secretary of State to refuse to give visas to countries that don't accept their nationalists back.
right,
But the big thing here is that a state could decide, an individual state, so like Texas or Louisiana, a judge in that state
mm,
could make the finding that that it could basically force the the Secretary of State to, like you said, not give visas to individuals from certain countries. That is very, very concerning.
right,
And this is, we'll have to see what happens. I was not able, I don't know if you know of a list, but I wasn't able to find like a definitive list of these recalcitrant countries.
right,
But in general, they, like, what I saw in general is countries include Venezuela, Cuba, Ethiopia, Eritrea, Pakistan, Russia, and Somalia, in India and China, possibly.
so,
Okay. It seems like a grayer area, but that's really huge. So the
right,
question, and this is supposed, this is part of the law that is like, this is not an executive order. This is not something that the Trump administration came out with yesterday. This is a law that the House has passed. The Senate has passed. It's going back to the House and will probably be signed, almost certainly be signed into law.
yeah,
So it is very concerning, to say the least. The question then is, okay, so this law comes into effect, then what's going to happen? And the answer is, we don't know.
mm,
Let's say that a state does sue,
right,
and they say to the Secretary of State, hey, we want you to not give visas to citizens of India, for example, or China, or whatever the country is.
right,
Then So first of all, there's the question of, would that actually happen? Not in a like optimistic view, but just diplomatically, that would be really huge. Diplomatically, economically, for all kinds of reasons, it would be really huge. But I think diplomatically, especially, that would be a really potentially disastrous move.
Right.
Then the other question is, if that does happen, there's absolutely going, or maybe even if it doesn't happen, maybe even if it, preemptively, although I don't know, I don't litigate, I don't know how that works, but there's going to be litigation about this. There's going to be lawsuits about it.
Right.
And again, this issue could go up to the Supreme Court for them to make the decision about, do states have the ability,
To pass.
to implement this requirement on the federal
Right.
Secretary of State.
So, like one thing that I read on LinkedIn and other sources that it also mentions canceling current visas. So that would be really huge because imagine, like, let's say I'm working on H-1B for a certain company in the state of Texas or the other states, and then if I get my visa canceled, like I'm just hanging in between, right? I basically have to go back to the country, and I don't have a job. Everything just turns upside down. I may have a house which I'm owning or rent or paying for or car.
Right?
How does that all work? Because that goes to state's liability, right? So I'm just curious, like, because that would be a question for a lot of people to like, am I next? So
Yeah.
or something on that. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that with a lot of these, and again, I don't mean to say, oh, don't worry about it, it's not going to happen. I don't mean to say that at all. I do think that with this and many, many other executive orders, and again, this is a statute, a change in the statute, not an executive order, but with a lot of these things, the question is implementation, right? So I'm not saying,
right,
oh, you'll be fine because they won't find you, but it would be really difficult. Let's just say that, they said you can't issue, or they rescind visas from people for people from India, China, wherever it is.
right,
Logistically, how's that going to happen?
exactly.
Yeah, all of it is like, I can't believe we're having this conversation, but we are. It's reality.
Yep. That's what I think. I saw a post, Samir's post, and I was like, oh my God, this is huge. And then I saw your videos and posts, and I was like, what's happening? This is the first time. Like I've been in this country for more than 12 years now, never
Yeah.
seen something like this. So, like, okay, well, we'll need an expert to understand what's exactly happening and
Yeah,
what.
and I do think about this Laken Riley Act. I do think, first of all, it's not signed into law yet, although I do think that it will be. I think there will be a lot more analysis of it and a lot more information available about it as it, once it's passed. And like I said, there could potentially be litigation, but I'm talking about analysis and information about it because, like I said, it's not something that was on my radar. And I practice, like 80% of my practice is employment-based immigration.
Yeah, exactly.
So I really think there's going to be a lot more information and analysis. And I don't know, for me, information is helpful in terms of anxiety, just assuaging anxiety
Right.
and knowing exactly how would this be implemented and would it potentially affect me or not. And sometimes it's not a great answer, but at least to have information, I think is helpful.
Right. And I think, yeah, that's what I was also thinking that because there's so many components associated to this H-1B specifically, right? Because they're like these people work for research institutions, they work for pharmaceutical giants, like R&D companies and whatnot, right? And let's say if you assume that these visas are canceled, that just brings your economy to a halt,
Oh,
right?
right. Absolutely.
And I think Trump is pro-economy, so I'm just curious to know what exactly would be his stand on this. So that's why I wanted to take your opinion. And I think the message is clear that it could be signed into law, but we don't know what's the real implications that we would see from this.
Right. Right.
And I think then the next one, I think, which you also wanted to discuss is the scrutiny, right? That also has come up. So if you can just explain that as well and see what's the implication there.
Yeah. So there were two executive orders that I wanted to touch on as kind of this third and last point.
Yeah.
First is a very brief executive order that is directed towards the U.S. Department of State.
Okay.
That says America first. Okay, so it says the purpose is from this day forward, the foreign policy of the United States shall champion core American interests and always put America and American citizens first. And then the policy, like the teeth behind it, is as soon as practicable, the Secretary of State shall issue guidance bringing the Department of State's policies, programs, personnel, and operations in line with the America First foreign policy, which puts America in its interests first. So I think as a result, it doesn't really give us, a lot of detail or information right now. It's basically saying to Department of State, hey, go make revisions to the Foreign Affairs Manual, to your other policies, procedures to be in line with these values.
Yeah.
And I think it's very similar to what we saw with the previous Trump administration. But we'll talk about the practical implications in just a minute after we talk about this closely related executive order that is related to enhancing visa vetting and screening.
Yeah.
So that one basically, like you said, increases scrutiny for visa screening and vetting. When I say visa screening and vetting, the first thing that we think of is people applying for visas at U.S. consulates overseas, right? So applying for H's and L's and E's and all the letter O's, P's, all the letter visas that we think about. And that's true. So we can anticipate potentially changes or additional delays in visa processing. If you've heard of 221G, that's a section of the law that is kind of a blanket section relating to delays in visa processing. The other thing that I find really interesting in this, in a bad way, is one of the points in this executive order says, it asks that the agency identify countries throughout the world for which vetting and screening information is so deficient as to warrant a partial or full suspension of the admission of nationals from those countries. And again, that's something the president has the ability to do. It's written into the statute, the Immigration and Nationality Act. Right. And it's rarely used, but of course Trump used it in his previous administration. If you remember, that's one of the very first things that he did was to implement a travel ban. It was, sometimes called a Muslim ban because of the countries that were addressed. But they're laying the groundwork, I think, not for a similar ban, but also for just across the board delays and challenges, just more scrutiny. And then, like I said, it also directs Department of State to evaluate and adjust regulations, policies, procedures, foreign affairs manuals to ensure the continued safety of American people.
Right.
So I think that this is going to not only affect the issuance of visas, and I'm not saying if you need to go home because your parents are sick, then don't go because you're not going to come back, or it's going to take 2 years to get the visa. It's very fact specific and every case is different, but just know that it's entirely possible. I really think we're going to see new policies and procedures. And I think processing is going to take longer. It can also affect the issuance of immigrant visas, so if a person is here on a letter visa, an H or L or E, whatever it is, they are here in a non-immigrant status, meaning a temporary visa classification. It can be temporary for years. It can you can apply for a green card, but it's temporary. Right. The immigrant visas are issued to individuals who have gone through a permanent residence process, employment-based or family-based or otherwise, and they're coming to the United States as green card holders, as residents of the United States. So this can affect that as well. The other thing is two other things. So many things. It can transfer to USCIS, to other agencies. So USCIS could use this to say, hey, Department of State has been advised to enhance their vetting and screening, and we adjudicate the petitions, the underlying petitions, like the O petition, the O1 petition, or the H1B petition, or the L petition. So we need to make sure that we are really screening and vetting petitions and applications well there. You and I were talking about this a few minutes ago before we started recording the employment-based interviews or employment-based green card application interviews. That has not been a thing, except for during the previous Trump administration. So I think those could be implemented again. The other thing, just in general, this particular point made me think of it. This third point made me think of it. But just in general, there are going to be changes in the way the immigration applications, petitions are processed that are not announced. Okay, and I think this is one of the ways, I think with this third point, when we're talking about enhancing visa vetting and screening, and also this direction for America First. I think
Right.
there are going to be some things that come out. There are going to be executive orders that come out, or changes to the Foreign Affairs Manual or to the USCIS Policy Manual. There are going to be other things that happen that just happen. And the only reason that we know that they're happening are from on the ground experience,
Right.
which is not fun. But it is super, super helpful, I find, to talk not necessarily to like Google things, because you can find all kinds of things on the internet.
Right. Right. Right.
Talk to your immigration lawyer about your particular situation and how whatever it is that you're worried about might affect you. So I
Right.
know that's kind of a rambling thing, but
Right.
I really think I find I get a lot of joy from helping people assuage their anxiety.
Right.
And I really think that that's helpful to talk to your immigration lawyer, because they know your case, they know the facts of your case, they know your history,
Right.
and they know that of other people who are going through a similar situation. And just so you all know, we immigration attorneys talk to each other. We can't share confidential information about our clients, but we are very, very collegial. We're very kind to each other, very helpful to each other, supportive, and we talk all the time about what's going on. So even if we don't have a case that's in your specific either jurisdiction or your specific fact pattern,
Right.
we have colleagues who do, and we can get information. So there's hope.
That's a very good point because I think a lot of us, including me, like when I search for things, I would go to ChatGPT, I would go to Google and just do a search, and whatever comes front. And what's happening is it's all generative AI, right? It looks at all the information, compiles few points for you, and then you choose to you, and you get convinced, oh, this is the right information. And that's the reason. Then when I came across all this EOs being signed yesterday and today, I was like, okay, I want someone who knows this thing and who can explain to everyone, like as an attorney, because as you mentioned, like you guys, you understand the law, you talk to each other, so you know more cases and what could actually be happening on the ground, right? Because a lot of things are in the air right now with these being signed and litigations coming across, and then maybe lawsuits coming across. So I think that's why I wanted to have you explain this and answer some of these questions, because these are burning topics. And I think I was scared. Like if I'm on H1B, I would be like, oh my God, what's happening?
Yes.
Right. And
Yes.
I could feel that a lot of people who I know are on H1B, good people, great people, like gave all like 10 years, 20 years in the country, but still in the dilemma, like what's next? So I think this could really help them understand that maybe wait for the air to clear up, talk to your immigration attorney, ask them questions, see what's the right path for you, and then take any step before just jumping onto a decision. So
Absolutely.
that would be that's thank you so much for taking the time. I know you're very busy. It's pretty late for you in the Eastern time zone, but thank you so much for helping us. And any final words of wisdom, anything that you think could be helpful in terms of the coming days, which could see more executive orders or things, anything that you want to share on that?
Sure, absolutely. So, yes, you're absolutely right that we for sure are going to see more changes in the coming days, weeks, months, even years.
Right.
Try to take it in stride. I think what you just said, to talk to your immigration attorney about what's going on, what your specific concerns are, because there's so many situations that, yes, you read the headlines and it sounds terrible. I mean, that's what the news literally, that's what they do. That's what they're paid to do, is to create sensational headlines. That's what sells, in other words.
Right.
So talk to your immigration attorney and keep the faith, keep the hope. Not everybody in the United States, it seems that way, but not everybody in the United States wants all foreign nationals to leave immediately, wherever. And we truly are a nation of immigrants, even if some of us have forgotten that. But my ancestors came in the 1600s, so we were maybe the first undocumented foreign nationals, with coming here without permission. Anyway, my point is, keep the faith, keep the hope, and talk to an immigration lawyer to see exactly how things might affect you.
Definitely. And I think before we close the call for today, just one point that just came to my mind, that the pilot H1B program that was going to start within the country, is that also hanging now? I think maybe we can close on that.
Cloud has evaporated, unfortunately. It was great. I had a handful of clients, that I knew firsthand that were able to take advantage, and it was awesome. But I don't think that's the priority right now for the current administration, unfortunately.
Makes sense. And I think with that, thank you so much, Emily. And I think we have probably a lot to uncover in the coming days. So I will
For sure.
be in touch with you again to help people understand this more clearly with more understanding of the law and how everything works.
Absolutely.
So thank you and have a wonderful, wonderful evening.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Praneet.